So last night I was watching this chilling documentary from CNN, Three Identical Strangers, about triplets who were separated at birth, put up for adoption by a single mother, and the Jewish Family Services, the largest nonprofit in New York, under the instruction of its Freudian advisors, thought that it'd be a bad idea for these triplets to know of each other, let alone to grow up together. And they also wanted to do an experiment to see what was more important, nature versus nurture. The Freudian assumption is that nurture is more important. And so they were separated, and it wasn't until they were 19 that they found out about each other. And of course they were very happy to find each other, because generally speaking, twins and triplets get along great. Because the more you have in common with other people, such as genetically, religiously, sports team affiliation, politically, the more you have in common with people, the better you get along. And generally speaking, the more you have in common with people genetically, the better you get along. So identical twins get along better than non-identical twins. Siblings, by and large, get along better than first cousins. And it was interesting to see this very powerful Jewish nonprofit finally get some scrutiny and not, as Steve Taylor points out, not be able to blame it on the Gentiles. So this brings us to HIAS. And I was just reading a column by Stacey McCain, from the Other McCain blog. And he points out he'd never heard of HIAS prior to Robert Bowers, the Pittsburgh shooter. And he did some research on them, finds out they're basically advocating open borders. So not only do they get at least 50% of their income from the federal government for resettling refugees, they're also the most politically active of the refugee resettlement programs. And they are actively supporting this caravan that's moving up through Mexico to the American border. They have thrown their high IQs and their organizational brilliance and their money and their influence all behind the cause of open borders. They are on the side of bringing in people from this caravan. They, in short, want to flood your bedroom and my bedroom with poisonous snakes. Because to them, they're still carrying on the same sort of crazy, insane, satanic experiment that the Jewish Family Services of New York was conducting by willfully separating twins and triplets and never letting them know about each other. There are all sorts of twins out there who were separated at birth by Jewish Family Services in New York, who to this day still have no knowledge of each other. Okay? The records are sealed at Yale University until 2066, apparently on the instructions of this Freudian psychiatrist who fled the Holocaust, came to America from Austria. And so this same sort of radical experimentation, the same sort of suicidal agenda that people will get on better the less they have common genetically. This is the same thing that the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is pushing forward. Same thing the Jewish Family Services in New York did with these twins and triplets. And it's insane. Every major Jewish organization in the United States supports immigration amnesty. Even the Republican Jewish Coalition supports immigration amnesty. Pretty much every major Jewish organization, the big Jews, the elite Jews, they support more refugee intake, more Muslims coming into this country, more Mexicans, more Africans, more Middle Eastern refugees. And from the perspective of like the little Jew, the ordinary American, this is insane. Why is diversity considered our strength? Why is it considered great the less we have in common with our fellows? If you have neighbors, you know that's insane. The less you have in common with your neighbors, the less likely you are to get along with them. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you are a high IQ, and therefore, in all likelihood, your neighbors are very likely high IQ as well, then higher IQ people put a higher value on new experiences. So if you're high IQ and your neighbors are high IQ Koreans and high IQ Africans and high IQ Muslims, then you're very likely to get along much better than if you're average IQ and your neighbors are average IQ or below. So high IQ people value new experiences. They deal better with diversity. And higher IQ people are very likely to get along pretty well with each other, even though they're genetically and religiously different. High IQ people much more likely to seek win-win solutions. And the higher the IQ, the more likely they are to seek win-win solutions. So yeah, high IQ people do a much better job of navigating diversity. And they do a much better job at dealing with dramatic economic changes that are brought on as a result of dramatic increase in diversity and dramatic increase in immigration and dramatic increase in competition from free trade and outsourcing. Higher IQ people do much better riding these bumpy waves. But generally speaking, the less you have in common with people, genetically, religiously, politically, the less likely you are to get along. So these big Jewish organizations are still pushing the same radical agenda that the Jewish Family Services were in New York in this amazing CNN film, Three Identical Strangers. You've got to see this film. These guys lost out on 19 years that they could have spent together. And this sick, twisted Jewish Family Services organization with its Freudian psychiatrists were monitoring these kids. They deliberately all set them up with families that had an older adopted female sibling. They all were adopted by families where these triplets would get an adopted sister who was 2 years older. And then Jewish Family Services would come around and test these kids and take video of these kids like all through their childhood. And people conducting the tests, they could have told the kids, hey, you know, you've got an identical brother over here, another one over there. So they all grew up within 100 miles of each other. But the people working on this experiment never did that. So the story ends tragically. One of the triplets was accused of murder. Another one of the triplets committed suicide. They all struggle with mental health issues, as did this other pair of twins in the documentary. And this experiment, where they were raised without any knowledge of their identical twins and triplets, did not do them any favors with their mental health. So the last 10 minutes of the documentary tries to make the case that nurture is at least as important as genetics, but for all sorts of life outcomes, we know that's not true. As far as earning, IQ, educational attainment, likelihood of getting caught committing crimes, these are all primarily genetic in origin. And you just see the power of genetics with these triplets, how they have similar tastes. They're all wrestlers, they have similar tastes in women, they all smoke the same type of cigarettes, that's similar physical mannerisms. So you just feel more comfortable with people like that. When I meet Australians, I immediately feel a sense of comfort. Australians, English South Africans, I just immediately tend to get along with these people because we all come from the British Commonwealth. So we share that same upbringing, and it's just tremendously relaxing. There's a similar sense of humor among the English, the Australians, and like a similar love of irony, kind of a similar disrespectful attitude towards authority, a similar skepticism of authority. And it's just, I grew up in Australia and also in England. It's just tremendously relaxing for me to be around Australians and the English, because the more you have in common with people, the better you're likely to get along. Like even couples, if they share the same letter starting their name, first name, they're more likely to get together and more likely to get along. If you share the same religion, the same race, the same ethnicity, the more likely you are to get along. And so this crazy idea that diversity is our strength, and meaning the less we have in common, the better, it's insane. And unfortunately, I hate to say this as a convert to Orthodox Judaism, but it's the same elite, largely secular Jewish groups is doing this barbarous experiment on 3 identical strangers, triplets, doing the same sort of experiment on the United States of America, pushing multiculturalism, same-sex marriage, more rights for transsexuals, more refugees, more Muslim intake, immigration amnesty for people who came here illegally. And then I think about South Africa, and there was this tiny group of radical left-wing Jews who also pushed for the abolition of apartheid. And then after they destroyed South Africa, okay, by abolishing apartheid, they fled the country, came to America, came to Australia, and they're trying to push the same sort of radical deconstruction in America and Australia. So they destroy one country, then they come here. And when I run into them, and almost to a man, there's like, yeah, we had to get rid of apartheid. Apartheid was evil. So I point out, well, you know, the average life expectancy for South Africans dropped a decade after the end of apartheid. And that first of all, none of them know that statistic. Doesn't shift them at all, because, you know, apartheid was just ipso facto evil. So, hey, who cares if people are dying a decade earlier than they were under apartheid? At least we were signaling for the virtuous crowd. At least we were doing the right thing so we could feel great about ourselves. Now we had to flee the country that we just destroyed. But let me come to the United States and push the same sort of suicidal, destructive policies that destroyed South Africa, that were destroying Germany under the Weimar Republic, that destroyed countless lives through Freudianism. And let me push the same sort of nonsense that captured tens of millions of people under communism. Wow, Narcos Mexico, November 16th. I cannot wait. I love that Narcos series on Netflix. So this will be the 4th season. This is gonna rock. Yeah, I admit it. I got a weak spot for movies and TV shows about narco states in Central and South America. Narcos Mexico, looking good. And it's just so discouraging, because your regular Jew does not have these radical pro-multicultural, pro-gay rights, pro-tranny rights, pro-immigration, pro-amnesty, Freudian analysis, all this nonsense. In fact, your ordinary Jew is more likely to stand up for free speech in America than your average white non-Jew. Your average Jew is more likely to say that racist speech should not be censored. Your average Jew is more likely to say that a teacher who says something racist should not be fired. Okay, more likely than even white non-Jews. Okay, so the average Jewish perspective is more pro-free speech than any other group in America, and yet you see all the Jewish elites lining up, the big Jews, the heads of these major Jewish organizations, lining up to place the blame for the Pittsburgh massacre on Gab AI and hate speech and an atmosphere created by Donald Trump, and there's just too much freedom of expression. We have to destroy that. So you'll see rabbis, they don't want any armed guards protecting their synagogues, these liberal left-wing rabbis. No, they want to censor social media. They want gun control. They want more gay rights and transsexual rights and more Muslims. But they don't want armed guards protecting their synagogues. Instead, they're pushing for the very policies that helped create the Pittsburgh massacre. So at least more people now know about HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and their open borders mission, how HIAS is promoting the cause of this caravan moving towards the United States border through Mexico.